Hello everybody, I'd like to welcome you to our sixth video in the pre-algebra playlist. We will first start off with multiplication examples. We'll do about 10 of those, so let's get started with our first multiplication example. So far you've been dealing with single-digit multiplication, such as what is 8 times 5, or what is 4 times 6, and many more like those. But right now, I'm pretty sure you're wondering how it would be different if we were to start multiplying with two-digit integers, such as how would we go about finding the answer of what 12 times 6 would be, or even what would be the right way of going about what is 13 times 15. So in this video, I'm going to go over exactly that. I'm going to go over two-digit multiplication with integers and even three-digit, and I'll even do a couple four-digit examples. So here's our first example. Let's say I want to find the answer to 15 times 6. When it comes to multiplication, the order of the setup doesn't really matter. 15 times 6 will give me the same answer as 6 times 15. But for the purposes of this video, what I will do is that I'll put the higher number on the top. So I set up 15 times 6 like this over here. What I do now is that I multiply 6 to every digit that's on the top. Basically, if I didn't have 6 and I had more than one digit on the bottom, I would multiply each digit on the bottom with each digit on the top. So let me do an example to give you a better idea. I start off by multiplying 6 to the 5 to give me 30. When you have 6 times 5 giving you 30, you take the units number, in this case that number is 0, and you put it right below the 5 and the 6. Then you carry over the 3, which is in the tens place, and you put it right above the 1. Now you move on to 6 times 1. You multiply these two numbers together and figure out the answer. In this case, 6 times 1 is equal to 6. Now, you don't just simply put down the 6 over here and tell me that that's your answer. There's one more step that's involved over here. You take the 6, which is the answer to 6 times 1, and then you add 3 that you carried over from the 30 to the 6 to give you 9. And you put the 9 right below the 3 and the 1 to give you your final answer of 90. Let's say you want to find the answer to what 36 times 6 is equal to. You start off with the setup. Now that you're done with the setup, let's get to the multiplication part. So the first thing that you do is that you multiply the 6 on the bottom with the 6 on the top to give you 36. What you do now is that you take the number in the ones place and you write it right below the two sixes. Next, you carry over the 3, which is in the tens place, on to the next number. The next thing that you do is that you multiply 6 and the 3 together to give you 18. Now you need to add 18 with the number on the top that you carried over from the first step of the problem. So 18 plus 3 will give you 21. And so now you put the 21 in the answer row to give you a final answer of 216. Now let's move on to multiplying two-digit integers with each other. Let's say you want to find the answer to what 15 times 12 is equal to. You begin with the setup and then you move on to the multiplication part of the problem. The first thing that you do is remember that you need to multiply each digit on the bottom with each of the digits on the top. So you start off by multiplying the 2 with the 5 to give you 10. You write the 0 on the bottom of the 5 and the 2, and you carry over the 1. Next, you multiply 2 with 1 to give you 2. But you need to remember that you need to add the carried over number to the 2 that you found. So you have 2 plus 1, and that gets you 3. And you put the 3 right below the 1s. Now, this is one more thing that you need to remember about multiplication, and it's one of the last. Every time you're done with multiplying one of the digits on the bottom with all of the digits on the top, you need to put a 0 like this over here before you move on to the multiplication of the next digit on the bottom with all of the other digits on the top. So once you put the 0, so now you have 1 times 5, that will give you a 5. And you put the 5 right below the 3. Next, since there was nothing carried over, you can simply multiply the 1 and the 1 together to give you 1, and put the 1 over here. In the last step, you need to multiply the 30 and the 150 together to give you 180. So your final answer of 15 times 12 is equal to 180. On the next page, let's do another example with two-digit multiplication with bigger numbers. In this fourth example, let's say I want to find the answer to what 36 times 42 is equal to. I begin with my setup by writing the number that is larger on the top. The first thing that I do is that I multiply the 6 with all of the digits on the top. So 6 times 2 will give me 12. I carry over the tens place 1 on top of the 4 and the 3. Then I put the 2 right below the 6 and the 2. Next I multiply 6 and 4 together to give me 24. Now I add the carried over 1 from the previous step to the 24 to give me 25. I write down the 25 and now I'm done with my first half of the problem. Now before I move on to the second digit on the bottom, I need to remember that I need to put a 0 over here. Now I do 3 times 2 to give me 6. Since there is no carrying over, I just write the 6 right below the 5. And then in the final step, I do 3 times 4 to give me 12. Next, I add 252 together with 1260 to give me my final answer. So my final answer of 42 times 36 is 1512. So let's do a few more examples. Let's say you want to find the answer to 101 times 15. You start off by setting up the problem. First step you do is you do 5 times 1 to give you the 5. Next you move on to 5 times 0 to give you 0. And next you do 5 times 1 to give you 5 again. Before continuing on to the next digit on the second row, you need to put a 0 right here. Now you can move on to the second digit by multiplying 1 and 1 together to give you 1. Then you do 1 times 0 to give you 0 again, and then you do 1 times 1 to give you 1. In the last step, you add the 505 and the 1010 together for a final answer of 1515. Let's do another example. In this example, let's say I want to find out what 1012 times 13 is equal to. So I start off with my correct setup and I move on to the multiplication part. So 3 times 2 will give me 6, 3 times 1 will give me 3, 3 times 0 will give me a 0, and 3 times 1 will give me a 3. Before I move on to the 1 on the second row, I need to add a 0 right here. Now I move on and I do 1 times 2 to give me a 2, 1 times 1 to give me a 1, 1 times 0 to give me a 0, and 1 times 1 to give me a 1. In the last step, I add these two numbers together. So my answer to what is 1012 times 13 is equal to 13,156. Now that you've gotten a hang of multiplying by a 2-digit integer in the second column, let's move on to a 3-digit integer on the second column. In this example, let's say I want to find the answer to 206 times 201. My first step will be the same regardless. So I start off by 1 times 6 to give me a 6, 1 times 0 to give me a 0, and 1 times 2 to give me a 2. As we did before, the second step will also be the same. I need to start off by adding 1 0 right on the bottom over here. Then I can move on to 0 times 6 to give me a 0, 0 times 0 to give me a 0, and 0 times 2 to give me a 0. Now, before we move on to the third digit, instead of adding a 1 0 over on the bottom like this over here, I need to add 2 zeros on the bottom like this over here. And then I can move on. So now I do 2 times 6 to give me a 12. Since 12 is a 2-digit number, I need to write the ones place 2 on the bottom over here and carry over the 1. Then I can do 2 times 0 to give me a 0. But I need to add 0 and the 1 that I carried over from the last step together to give me a 1. Then finally I can do 2 times 2 to give me a 4. And now I add these 3 sets of numbers together. So my final answer is 41,406. So let's do another example with 3-digit multiplication. Let's say I have 205 times 306. First thing I do is I multiply the 5 with the 6 to give me a 30. By now you should be getting the hang of carrying over, so I'll skip over writing down 30 on the side. 5 times 0 gives me a 0, but then I need to add the 3 on the top over here to the 0 to give me a 3 on the bottom over here. Then I move on to 5 times 3 to give me a 15. Before I move on to the multiplying by 0 part of the problem, I need to put 1 0 over here. So 0 times 6 will give me a 0, same thing with 0 times 0, and again the same thing with 0 times 3. Before I move on to the third digit on the bottom, I need to put 2 zeros on the bottom. So 2 times 6 gives me a 12. Then I get 2 times 0 as 0, but then I add the 1 that I carried over in the last step to it to give me a 1. And then 2 times 3 will give me a 6. I add it all up together, so my answer to 306 times 205 is equal to 62,730. Let's say I want to find the answer to what is 106 times 209. I start by multiplying 6 and the 9 together to give me 54, 6 and the 0 together to give me 0, but then I add the 5 that I carried over in the last step to give me a 5, 6 times 2 to give me 12, and then I move on to the 0. Before I do that, I need to put a 0 over here. So 0 times 9 will give me a 0, 0 times 0, and 0 times 2 will give me zeros again. So I have a 0 over here and a 0 over here. Before I move on to multiplying by 1, I need to put 2 zeros on the bottom. So 1 times 9 gives me 9, 1 times 0 gives me 0, and 1 times 2 gives me a 2. I add all these set of 3 numbers together, so my answer to what is 209 times 106 is 22,154. Now let's do one more example to reach our quota of 10 examples with multiplication. But this time I'll take it a step forward and do it with 4 digits. So I'm sure you already know how to multiply correctly and efficiently and very fast with 2-digit integers. So I'll just pick really easy numbers with 4-digit multiplication, because the important part is that you get the whole concept behind it. So let's say I want to multiply 1,111 with 2,222. The first thing I do is that I multiply the 1s with all the 2's on the top. So that will give me 4 2's as my first row. Before I move on to the second one in the problem, I need to put a 0 on the bottom over here. Then, similarly, I'll get 4 more 2's right over here. Before I move on to the third one, I need to put 2 zeros on the bottom over here, like this. Then again, when I multiply the third one with all the 2's on the top, I'll get 4 2's again. By now, I think you have gotten the hang of it, and you're probably thinking that, do I put 3 zeros on the bottom over here now? Well, yes, that's exactly right. Since you're multiplying by the 4th digit on the bottom, you need to start off by putting 3 zeros on the bottom over here, like this. Then you can put the rows of 2's over here, and then finally add these 4 sets of numbers together. Alright, so here's your final answer. And now let's do a few examples with division, because I didn't realize that I'm running out of time. So let's do about 3 or 4 examples with division. So let's begin. On most standardized tests, what will happen is that they'll give you 4 or 5 different answer choices, and then you'll have to pick out which one fits the best. So let's say they give you the following answer choices. So one of the ways you can do it is through the method of long division, which might take a long time. Or what you can do is that you can start out by picking the middle number, in this case 9, and multiply it by 13 to see how close you get with 169. So what I mean by this is that in the last video we learned that if the division problem is given in this form over here, you can rearrange this form over here into a form that involves multiplication, like this over here. Now, if you start off with your answer choice being 9, you can write it like this over here. Now that you've been getting really good at multiplication, you can figure out that 13 times 9 is equal to 117. Since 117 is smaller than 169, you can get rid of this answer choice over here. Now, instead of blindly picking another answer choice to do the trial and error with, you can actually eliminate both A and B. This is because 9 is bigger than the 5 and the 7. So even if you multiply 13 and 5 together, or 13 and 7 together, your answer choice will be less than 117 over here. So what you can do now is that you can focus on the answer choices of D and E. So let's say you pick the biggest number, 13. So if you do 13 times 13 to fit the number 3 times number 2 equals number 1 criteria, and get the answer of 169. So since 13 times 13 is equal to 169, you know that 169 divided by 13 is equal to 13. Now let's do 2 more examples. Let's say you want to find the answer to what is 56 divided by 4. Instead of using the process of elimination like I did in the last example, I'll go over the long division method in this scenario. So the way I do the long division process is that I do a little box thing over here, inside of which I write the 56, the first number, and then outside of which I write the 4. The next thing that I do is that since I have one digit over here, I only first deal with the one digit inside. In this case, I only deal with the 5 first. What I need to do now is that I need to figure out some number so that when I multiply it to 4 will get me as close, if not exactly, to 5. So basically 4 times what number will get me as close to 5, if not exactly to 5. If I do 4 times 1, that gets me 4. So what I do now is that I put a 1 on top of the 5 over here. Next thing, I do 4 times 1 to give me 4, and I write it right below the 5 over here. Then I subtract 4 from the 5 to give me a 1 over here. Next, I carry down the 6 below over here. Then I figure out what number do I need to multiply 4 with to get me as close to 16, if not exactly 16. If I try 4, that gets me exactly to 16. So I put a 4 over here. Next, I multiply the number that I put on the top with the number that's outside the box. So 4 times 4 will give me a 16. And so I write the 16 right below over here. Next, I subtract the 16 that I wrote over here from the 16 on the top. This gives me a 0. Now, if I get 0 as my answer, I have successfully completed my division. So 56 divided by 4 is equal to 14. Okay, so let's do one more example with long division. Let's say I want to find the answer to what is 196 divided by 14. So I set it up like I did in the previous example by putting the 196 inside the box and 14 outside the box. Since I'm dealing with two numbers on the outside as opposed to the 1 in the previous example, I need to do a similar process with the first two numbers inside the box instead of the 1. So what number times 14 will get me as close to 19, if not exactly 19? So if I do 14 times 1, that gets me 14, so that is 5 units away from 19. So since 1 is the number that I'm looking for, I put a 1 on the top over here. Next, I do 1 times 14 to give me 14. So I write the 14 down over here and subtract it from the 19. So 19 minus 14 gives me a 5. Next, I simply carry down the 6 over here. Now I'm dealing with two numbers on the outside and two numbers on the inside. So 14 times what number will give me as close to 56, if not exactly 56. Now, since you're really good at multiplication, you realize that if I do 14 times 4, that gets me not just close to 56, it gets me exactly to 56. So the 4 is the number that I'm looking for, and therefore I put a 4 over here, and then I multiply it by the 14 on the outside. So 4 times 14 is 56. I write the 56 down over here, and subtract it from the number on the top. The number on the top happens to be 56. Therefore, I'll get a 0 on the bottom. Once I get the 0 on the bottom, that tells me that I'm done with my problem. So, 196 divided by 14 is equal to 14. And I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned a lot from it. In the next video, we will go over exponents. So keep on working hard until then, and I'll see you in the next video.